Clay Mercer moved the rifle from the fence post to his shoulder. Slow. Careful. A pale scar split the knuckles of the hand that once held a wedding ring. Then a boy stumbled out of the sagebrush. Apache. Barefoot. Starving enough to sway in the wind. Food. Rancher. Clay gave the tribe his last cow before the sun set. Now dust rolled across the hills at dawn. 300 Apache warriors riding straight for his gate. Clay Mercer felt the prairie go quiet. Because whatever rode into his yard that morning, his life was about to change forever. Before we ride deeper into the story, hit subscribe, ring the bell, so you'll never miss another ride through the legends of the Wild West. Now, let's get back to the trail. Dust rolled slow across Clay Mercer's yard. 300 riders waited beyond the fence. Still as carved stone. Feathers moving soft in the morning wind. Clay Mercer stood beside the ranch gate. Rifle lowered. Eyes steady. The Apache chief rode forward alone. Tall in the saddle. Gray braids hanging against a weathered buckskin coat. Behind him, the boy Clay had fed the day before clung to the horse's blanket. Barefoot. Thin as winter wire. The chief stopped 10 paces from the gate. Looked over the ranch. The barn. The well. The small herd grazing thin grass near the creek. Then his eyes settled on Clay. "You fed my people." His voice carried quiet across the yard. Clay said nothing. Wind brushed the prairie grass flat. The chief steadied him longer. Like a man measuring iron. "You gave a cow." Clay shifted his weight once. Boot grinding dirt. The riders behind the chief did not move. Not a horse snorted. Not a saddle creaked. 300 men waiting on one answer. The boy slid down from the horse. Slow. Careful. His legs trembled when his feet touched the ground. He walked toward the gate. Clay watched him come. The boy stopped 2 steps away. Dark eyes lifted. "You remember me?" Clay nodded once. The boy looked thinner in daylight. Hunger hollowed his cheeks. But his back stayed straight. "You saved my tribe last night?" Clay's jaw tightened. "Wasn't saving." The boy shook his head. "Yes." Behind him the chief's horse shifted. Leather creaked. Clay glanced toward the hills. Warriors stretched across the ridge like a dark line burned into the land. Too many rifles. Too many bows. Too much history sitting between them. The boy looked back at the ranch. At the barn roof. At the thin cattle grazing near the fence. "You are alone here." Clay did not answer. The boy's eyes moved again. Sharp. Taking measure. Like someone used to reading a place. "You should not be." Clay exhaled once. Slow. "Your tribe got what it needed." The boy didn't move. "My tribe is starving." Wind rattled the dry fence rails. Clay looked past him toward the chief. The older man waited without hurry. Patience of stone. Clay had seen that patience before. Men who carried war but didn't rush it. The boy spoke again. Soft. "But others will come." Clay's eyes narrowed. "What others?" The boy turned slightly. Looked toward the far valley. Where the cattle trails ran down toward the town. White ranchers. Silence settled across the yard. Heavy. The boy met Clay's eyes again. "They will not like what you did." Clay's hand rested against the rifle stock. Loose. "Ready." The boy steadied him a moment longer. Then said the words that tightened the air like a drawn rope. "My father says men who feed enemies often lose their land." Clay Mercer looked out across the 300 warriors surrounding his ranch. And understood something had already begun. The riders did not leave. Not at once. They stayed on the ridge through the morning. Watching. Wind moved the tall grass around their horses. Feathers flickered. Rifles rested across saddles. Clay Mercer worked anyway. He carried a water bucket from the well. Slow. Steady. Like 300 warriors waiting outside his fence meant nothing at all. The Apache boy followed him across the yard. Bare feet silent on the dirt. Clay poured water into the trough. The cattle pushed forward. Thin animals. Winter had not been kind. The boy studied them. You keep them alive. Clay wiped his hands on his trousers. Trying. The boy walked along the fence. Ran a hand across the wood rails. You gave one away. Clay did not answer. A crow called somewhere near the cottonwoods. The boy turned back toward him. My father says white ranchers do not give cattle. Clay leaned on the trough. Eyes on the horizon. Most don't. The boy waited. Then asked the question plain. Why did you? Clay's jaw tightened. Wind pushed across the yard. Dust lifted around their boots. The riders on the ridge remained still. Clay picked up a hammer near the barn wall. A loose plank waited on the fence line. He walked toward it. The boy followed. Clay drove the first nail hard. Metal rang sharp in the quiet morning. The boy watched the motion. Hammer rising. Falling. Again. You are not afraid of us. Clay set the nail deeper. Should I be? The boy shrugged. Most men are. Clay drove the final strike. The fence plank settled tight. He lowered the hammer. Fear doesn't feed cattle. The boy nodded slowly. But his eyes moved to Clay's left hand. Clay noticed. He always noticed. The boy stepped closer. Studied the pale groove on Clay's finger. The mark where a wedding ring had once lived. You had a wife. Clay's shoulders went still. Just for a moment. Wind slid through the grass again. Clay set the hammer down beside the fence. Picked up a coil of rope. Busy hands. Quiet hands. But the boy did not move away. My mother says men carry ghosts in their hands. Clay kept coiling rope. Tighter. Tighter. Your mother here? The boy shook his head. She died when the soldiers burned our winter camp. Clay stopped. Just once. The rope slipped loose in his grip. The boy saw it. Saw the way Clay's eyes went distant. Toward nothing. Toward somewhere far older than the ranch yard. My wife died too, Clay said. The words came out rough. Like something unused for years. The boy waited. Clay walked toward the barn. The boy followed again. Inside, the barn held the cool smell of hay and leather. Dust floated through beams of morning light. Clay lifted a saddle onto a wooden rack. His movements slow. Measured. My fault, he said. The boy tilted his head. Clay brushed dirt from the saddle horn. Did not look at him. Raiders came through the valley. Silence filled the barn. Looking for cattle. Clay's hand rested on the leather. They found the house instead. The boy said nothing. Clay's voice stayed quiet. I wasn't there. Just 3 words. But they sat heavy in the air. I was chasing a stray steer 2 miles south. The barn creaked softly as wind touched the boards. When I got back. Clay stopped. His hand tightened on the saddle horn. The leather groaned. The boy stepped closer. Not afraid. Not pitying. Just listening. House was smoke, Clay said. Graves behind the cottonwoods now. Silence stretched long. Then the boy spoke gently. You feed people so no one burns again. Clay looked at him for the first time. Really looked. The boy's face held no judgment. Only understanding older than his years. Clay exhaled slow. Maybe the kid was right. Maybe that was the truth he never said out loud. Outside the barn a horse snorted. Clay stepped toward the door. The boy followed. The riders on the ridge had shifted. Some turning their horses. Dust rising along the horizon. Clay watched them go. 300 warriors fading slowly into the prairie. Only the chief remained. Waiting. Watching. The boy stood beside Clay. "My father does not trust white men," he said. Clay nodded. "Smart man. But he watched you all morning." Clay kept his eyes on the chief. "And?" The boy's voice stayed calm. "He says a man who carries that much grief is either dangerous," a long pause, "or honest." Clay rested his hand against the barn post. The wood warmed from the sun. Across the valley the distant road shimmered. Somewhere down there sat the town. And men who would hear about yesterday soon enough. White ranchers. Sheriff. Cattle buyers. Men who counted cows like coins. The boy looked toward the road too. They will come. Clay knew. Trouble traveled faster than horses on the frontier. Especially when a rancher fed Apache warriors. Clay pushed away from the post. Picked up the hammer again. Another fence plank needed fixing. Work did not stop. Not for grief. Not for warriors. Not for whatever storm was riding up from the valley. Behind him the boy spoke once more. Quiet. But certain. "My father says men with wounds like yours." Clay kept hammering. The boy finished the sentence anyway. "Are the ones who change the fate of valleys." The Apache chief waited at the edge of the yard. Horse still. Eyes calm. Clay Mercer walked across the dirt toward him. Boots slow. Hammer still in his hand. The boy followed behind Clay. Bare feet quiet. Wind brushed the tall grass along the fence. The rest of the warriors had already disappeared into the hills. Only the chief remained. Watching the ranch the way a hunter studies ground before setting a trap. Clay stopped 10 feet away. The chief looked down from the saddle. "Your land sits between water and valley." Clay didn't answer. The chief's eyes moved across the cattle. Thin herd. Winter worn. "You are not a rich rancher." Clay spat dust to the side. "Didn't know I was supposed to be." The chief nodded once. His gaze moved to the barn. The well. The small house with smoke curling from the chimney. "You live alone." Clay's voice stayed flat. "Been that way a while." Silence settled again. The boy stepped beside his father. Clay noticed the two of them shared the same stillness. The same patience. The chief finally spoke again. "My son told me what you did." Clay rested the hammer against his thigh. The chief continued. "You fed people your neighbors call enemies." Clay shrugged once. "Hungry people aren't enemies." The chief steadied him longer. Long enough for the wind to rise and fall again. Then he swung down from his horse. Boots touching the dirt. The movement carried weight. Not threat. Decision. He stepped forward slowly. "My tribe has little food left." Clay knew that already. He had seen the boy's ribs. Seen the way the warriors' horses showed their bones. Winter had starved everyone. The chief gestured toward the valley. "Hunting grounds empty." Then toward the hills. "Soldiers push us east." His eyes returned to Clay. "White ranchers push west." The boy spoke quietly beside him. "There is nowhere left." Clay shifted his stance. The hammer hung loose in his grip. "So what's this about?" The chief's voice stayed calm. "An agreement." Clay raised an eyebrow. The chief pointed toward the creek running behind the pasture. "Your land has water." Then toward the grazing cattle. "You have food." Clay waited. The chief continued. "My people need both until spring." Clay's jaw tightened slightly. "And what do I get?" The chief's answer came without hesitation. "Peace." The word sat in the air. Heavy. The boy added softly. "No warriors crossing your fences." Clay looked toward the hills. 300 men had stood there an hour ago. 300 reasons to choose his next words carefully. The chief went on. "Your cattle can graze the valley." Clay frowned. "That valley belongs to Briggs." The chief's eyes sharpened slightly. "We know the man." Clay felt something tighten in his chest. Everyone knew Walter Briggs. Biggest cattle baron in the county. Owner of land he hadn't even seen yet. Briggs believed the valley belonged to him. Because money said so. The chief spoke again. "Briggs sends riders across our hunting ground." The boy nodded. "They chase buffalo away." Clay looked between them. "And you want me in the middle?" The chief shook his head slowly. "You are already in the middle." Wind pushed across the ranch again. The barn door creaked. Clay rubbed his thumb along the hammer handle. Thinking. The chief waited without pressure. A man used to patience. Finally Clay spoke. "How long?" "Until spring grass grows." Clay calculated the months in his head. 3. Maybe 4. Long enough for trouble to arrive. Long enough for town gossip to travel. Long enough for Briggs to hear. The boy watched Clay carefully. "You gave food without asking price yesterday." Clay glanced down at him. "That was one cow." The boy's eyes stayed steady. "And today?" Clay exhaled slowly. The chief extended his hand. Palm open. Not as a warrior. As a man making terms. Clay stared at the hand. Dust swirled around their boots. Somewhere a fence board knocked softly in the wind. Finally Clay set the hammer down. Reached out. Their hands met. Rough skin against rough skin. The chief nodded once. "It is done." The boy smiled slightly. The first smile Clay had seen from him. The chief turned toward his horse. But before mounting he looked back at Clay. "There will be riders from town soon." Clay already knew that. Men like Briggs do not like agreements they did not make. Clay picked up the hammer again. "Then they can ride out here and say it." The chief studied him a final moment. Then mounted his horse. He and the boy rode toward the hills. The ranch fell quiet again. Only wind. Only cattle. Only the sound of Clay Mercer hammering another nail into the fence. But far down the valley road, a faint line of dust had already begun to rise. The next morning, the boy was back. Sun barely over the ridge. Frost still clinging to the trough. Clay Mercer came out of the house with a tin cup of coffee in one hand and stopped on the porch. The boy stood by the broken gate latch. Waiting. No horse. No warriors. Just him. Thin shoulders under a worn blanket. Dark eyes alert in the cold. Clay drank once. Said nothing. The boy lifted the broken iron latch from the ground. "I can fix this." Clay stepped down from the porch. Boots thudding on the frozen boards. "You got a name?" The boy straightened. "Taza." Clay nodded once. Then took another swallow of coffee. "Taza." The boy held up the latch again. "I can fix this." Clay looked at the gate. Then at the empty yard. Then toward the hills where the tribe camped out of sight. "You're early." Taza glanced east. "Hungry men wake early." Clay almost smiled. Almost. Instead he set the cup on the porch rail and walked toward the barn. Taza followed. Inside, the barn still carried the night's cold. Leather stiff. Hay dry. A lantern hung dark beside the stall door. Clay pulled a hammer and nails from the workbench. Set them down without ceremony. Taza took them fast. Like a boy used to borrowing time. Clay forked hay into the nearest stall while Taza crouched by the gate. Metal tapped softly. Careful work. No wasted motion. After a while Clay glanced over. The boy had taken the latch apart and was straightening the bent pin with a stone and the hammerhead. Small hands. Steady hands. Clay kept working. Outside, the cattle shifted and breathed steam into the morning air. By the time the sun climbed over the cottonwoods, the gate swung clean again. Taza pushed it open. Closed it. Open. Closed. No sag. No scrape. Clay stepped forward and tested it himself. Solid. He gave one short nod. Taz looked pleased but did not show too much of it. "My grandfather made traps," he said, "before soldiers took our iron." Clay ran his hand over the latch. "Good work." The words landed between them like something heavier than praise. Taz looked down for a moment, then toward the trough. "It's low." Clay followed his gaze. It was. A crack of thaw had opened in the side of the barrel line during the night. Water had seeped into the dirt and frozen there. Clay grabbed 2 buckets. Taza took one before being asked. They walked to the well together. Rope creaked. Pulley groaned. Cold water flashed silver in the morning light. Back and forth they went. No wasted speech. Just breath. Bootsteps. The soft slosh of water. The ranch sounded different with another person moving through it. Less hollow. By midday the frost had lifted. Mud showed under the thin crust of winter ground. Clay worked the south fence where 2 posts leaned crooked from old wind. Taza carried nails in a tobacco tin and handed them over one by one. When Clay drove the mule into the first post, the sound rang hard across the pasture. Taza flinched. Not from fear. From memory. Clay noticed. Said nothing. A moment later the boy pointed beyond the fence. Far down the valley road a wagon moved through the dust. Town wagon. 2 mules. Dark canvas top. Clay squinted into the distance. "Danner's feed wagon," he said. Taza kept watching it. "Does he like Apache?" Clay set the next post in the hole. "Doesn't like anybody poor." The boy considered that. Then handed him another nail. The wagon did not turn toward the ranch. It kept rolling toward town. Still, Clay felt the warning in it. News traveled by feed sack, by poker table, by church porch. Soon enough every man in the county would know Clay Mercer had made terms with Apache. He drove the post deeper. Harder than before. By afternoon clouds pushed in from the north. Thin gray ones. Fast moving. Wind came colder. Clay climbed onto the barn roof to patch a loose strip of tin before the weather changed. Below, Taza sorted kindling beside the porch steps. Small pieces first. Then larger splits. A neat stack. Useful. The boy paused once and looked toward the graves behind the cottonwoods. 3 low markers beyond the back fence. No flowers. Just weathered wood. When Clay climbed down, Taza was still looking. "Your wife is there." Clay set the hammer on the porch. "Yes." Taza did not ask more. He just bent, picked up the kindling, and carried it inside as if quiet could be a kind of respect. That evening the house held a different warmth. Firelight moving on the walls. A stew pot simmering low. Wet boots drying near the stove. Clay sat at the table mending a bridle strap. Taza sat on the floor by the hearth, shaving curls from a cedar scrap with Clay's old pocket knife. The knife had belonged to Ellen. Clay had not let another hand touch it in 3 years. Now he watched the boy use it carefully. No boasting. No clumsiness. Just work. The wind pressed against the cabin walls. The fire answered back. After a while Taza held up the cedar. He had carved a small bird into it. Nothing fancy. But alive enough in the shape. "For the shelf," he said. Clay looked toward the mantel. Empty except for a clock that no longer ran. He reached over and took the carving. Turned it once in his hand. Then set it on the shelf above the hearth. A small thing. But the room changed when it stood there. Less like a place waiting to die. More like a place being lived in. Then came the knock. Not loud. Not friendly either. 3 hard raps against the door. Clay's eyes lifted. Taza went still by the fire. Outside, a horse snorted in the dark. The knock came again. Harder this time. Clay Mercer did not move right away. Firelight flickered across the cabin walls. Taza sat frozen beside the hearth. The boy's knife stopped carving mid-stroke. Clay rose slow from the table. The chair legs scraped the floor. Outside, leather creaked. Horse shifting. Not a traveler. Travelers called out first. Clay lifted the rifle from the rack beside the door. Taza's eyes followed the movement. "Stay back," Clay said quietly. The boy nodded. Clay slid the bolt. Steel clicked soft. Then he opened the door. Cold wind pushed inside. 3 men sat their horses in the yard. Lantern light from the doorway reached them just enough. Dust coats. Wide hats. Town men. The one in front leaned forward in the saddle. Sheriff Harlan Pike. Gray beard. Heavy eyes that missed little. Even in the dark. "Evening, Clay." Clay kept the rifle low but ready. "Sheriff." Pike glanced toward the house behind Clay. His gaze lingered a second longer than polite. "You got company tonight?" Clay did not turn. "Just supper." Behind Pike, the other 2 riders shifted. One of them Clay recognized. Darren Cole. Walter Briggs' foreman. That told Clay everything he needed to know. Pike rested a hand on his saddle horn. Word traveled quick today. Clay leaned one shoulder against the door frame. Town gossip moves faster than horses. Pike gave a tired half smile. "That it does." The sheriff nodded toward the hills. "Heard Apache were camped out there." Clay didn't answer. Pike's eyes sharpened slightly. "And I heard a rancher gave them cattle." Silence stretched between them. The wind rattled the fence somewhere in the dark. Finally Clay spoke. "Hungry people eat." Darren Cole snorted behind the sheriff. "That's one way to look at it." Clay's gaze slid toward him. Cole leaned forward in his saddle. "You know what folks in town are saying?" Clay didn't ask. Cole answered anyway. "They're saying Clay Mercer's feeding savages." Taza shifted inside the cabin. Just enough for Clay to hear it. Clay's hand tightened slightly on the rifle. Pike noticed. Raised a hand. "Easy now." His voice stayed calm. But his eyes had turned serious. "I didn't ride out here to start trouble." Clay waited. Pike continued. "I rode out here because men in town are nervous. Men like Briggs." Clay said the name flat. Cole smiled without warmth. "Mr. Briggs owns that valley your cattle graze." Clay's voice stayed even. "My cattle graze grass." Cole's smile faded. Pike spoke again before the tension broke. "Briggs claims Apache have been stealing stock." Clay's jaw tightened. "You seen any proof?" Pike shook his head. "No." Cole cut in. "Doesn't matter." Clay looked at him. Cole leaned forward. "What matters is Briggs believes it." Wind pushed dust across the yard. The horses shifted again. Pike rubbed his beard slowly. "Briggs is talking about organizing riders." Clay said nothing. The sheriff went on. "Protection posse." Clay's eyes hardened. "Protection from what?" Cole answered. "From Apache." Taza moved again inside the cabin. Clay could feel the boy listening. Every word. Cole looked past Clay toward the doorway. "You got one of them in there?" Clay didn't move. Cole grinned slightly. "Town might want to know that." Pike's voice cut through the moment. "That's enough, Darren." Cole leaned back in the saddle. But the damage was already done. Pike looked back at Clay. "Briggs is stirring the town." Clay nodded once. "Figures." The sheriff lowered his voice. "Men scared of losing cattle." Clay's eyes flicked toward the dark valley. Where his herd grazed under moonlight. "They're more scared of losing land." Pike didn't argue. He knew it too. Cole turned his horse slightly. Boot creaking in the stirrup. "You made a mistake, Mercer." Clay didn't blink. Cole continued. "Helping Apache won't make you friends in town." Clay's voice came low. "Wasn't looking for friends." Cole's smile returned. Then you're going to need allies. Silence again. Longer this time. Pike straightened in the saddle. I'll keep the peace as long as I can. Clay met his eyes. And after that? Pike glanced toward the hills, where the tribe waited beyond sight. After that, men start making their own decisions. The sheriff turned his horse. Cole lingered one moment longer. Studying Clay. Studying the dark doorway behind him. Then he tipped his hat. Slow. Mocking. Sleep light tonight, Mercer. The riders turned toward the valley road. Hooves fading into the night. Dust settling behind them. Clay closed the door. The latch clicked softly. The cabin fell quiet again. Only the fire. Only the wind outside. Taza stood beside the hearth, still holding the knife. You heard. Clay set the rifle against the wall. Yes. The boy looked toward the window. Toward the darkness beyond the ranch. Briggs once swore. Clay walked back to the table. Picked up the bridle strap again. Leather creaking in his hands. Briggs once land. Taza watched him work. You will fight him. Clay didn't answer. The fire popped softly. The boy spoke again. My father says men like Briggs never stop. Clay's needle pushed through the leather. Steady. Precise. Finally he looked up. Eyes calm. Cold. Then I guess he picked the wrong ranch to start. Morning came thin and gray. No sunrise worth naming. Just a pale wash over the ridge and frost clinging to the fence wire. Clay Mercer was already in the yard. Splitting wood. One hard swing at a time. The axe bit deep. Wood cracked clean. Taza stood by the trough with a bucket, breaking ice with the back of a hatchet. Small blows. Sharp sounds. The ranch woke in pieces. Steam from the horses. Cattle shifting slow beyond the south pasture. A crow on the barn roof. No peace in any of it. Not after the sheriff's visit. Not after Darren Cole's smile in the dark. Clay drove the axe again. Another log split. Taza glanced toward the valley. Watched the road. Watched the hills. Always watching now. Clay noticed something there. Taza set the hatchet down. Maybe. Clay waited. The boy wiped his hands on his blanket. My father's hunters found tracks 2 mornings ago. Clay leaned on the axe handle. What kind? Cattle. Clay's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked toward his own herd. Counted the shapes by habit. Still there. Still thin. Still his. Taza came closer. Not yours. Clay said nothing. The boy went on. Branded stock. Too many for a family ranch. Driven hard through our hunting ground. Wind moved across the yard. Cold. Dry. Clay lifted the next log onto the block. Briggs. Taza nodded once. He sends them where buffalo should be. The axe paused in Clay's hands. Taza looked toward the north ridge. If our hunters follow the cattle, white men say we are raiding. Clay understood the shape of it at once. Simple. Dirty. Useful. Run cattle through Apache ground. Starve the game. Force angry men into motion. Then call them thieves. Clay split the log so hard the pieces jumped. Taza did not flinch. My father knows this, the boy said. But he has no proof men in town will listen to. Clay set the axe down. Proof. That was the word that mattered. Not truth. Truth meant little to men like Briggs. Proof did. He reached for his coat on the porch rail. Taza watched him. You're going out. Clay shrugged into the coat. Should have gone yesterday. The boy grabbed the small field glass from the window shelf before Clay asked. Useful. Always useful. Together they saddled the 2 horses in silence. Leather creaked. Bits clinked. The air smelled of hay, cold iron, and wood smoke. Clay mounted first. Taza swung up lighter, quicker, onto the small dun pony the Apache had left for him 3 days before. They rode north. Past the creek. Past the last fence post. Out where Clay's land loosened into valley and old grass. The world opened there. Wide sky. Distant cottonwoods. Wind flattening the prairie in long silver-gray waves. Taza rode half a length ahead. Eyes on the ground. Reading sign the way other boys read paper. He lifted a hand once. Pointed. Hoofprints. Many. Deep in the thaw-soft earth. Clay dismounted. Knelt. Touched the edge of a track. Fresh enough. Not from last week. From yesterday. Maybe last night? He found the mark of a shoe on one print. Town blacksmith pattern. Square nails. Rich ranch work. Not tribal ponies. Keep moving, Clay said. Taza was already back in the saddle. They followed the trail through a stand of scrub willow and into a shallow cut where the wind fell off and sound changed. Quieter there. Too quiet. Then came the smell. Clay felt it before he fully named it. Blood. Old smoke. Rot starting at the edges. He swung down again near the mouth of the cut. Taza was off his pony before the horse stopped. At the bottom of the draw lay a steer carcass. Half butchered. Not skin clean. Not taken for meat. Just hacked open and left. Wolves had started the rest. Flies moved even in the cold. Clay crouched beside the dead animal. Turned the stiffened neck enough to see the brand. A double bar slash. Walter Briggs. Taza stood above him. Face hard. There. He pointed higher up the bank. Clay climbed. Boots slipping in loose dirt. At the top he found the rest. A strip of red cloth tied to a cedar branch. Apache color. Placed too neatly. Too openly. Below it, a broken arrow shaft shoved into the mud. Brand new wood. No weathering. No battle sign. A stage prop. A lie left where fools would find it. Clay stared at it a long moment. Then pulled the arrow free. His mouth flattened. Taza looked down toward the dead steer. He leaves his own cattle. Clay nodded. To make a story. The boy's voice stayed low. For the sheriff. For the army if he can get them. Clay looked across the valley. Far off, almost lost in distance, riders moved near the western ridge. Tiny shapes. Driving another line of stock where no line should be. Taza lifted the field glass and looked. Then passed it to Clay. Through the lens the shapes sharpened. 6 riders. 1 wagon. Briggs men. And in front of the herd rode Dare and Cole. Easy as Sunday. Like the whole valley belonged to him. Clay lowered the glass. There it was. Not just cattle theft talk. Not just rumor. A pattern. A plan. Taza's voice cut through the wind. My father said Briggs wanted both sides angry. Clay looked at the fake Apache marker in his hand. He wants shooting. Taza nodded. Because once shooting starts, men stop asking who started it. They heard hooves then. Not distant. Close. Clay turned fast. 2 riders broke over the south rise. Town men. Not Briggs this time. Smaller ranchers. Young. Armed. Clay recognized one. Eli Tanner's eldest boy. They pulled up sharp at sight of Clay and Taza together above the carcass. The young man's face changed. First surprise. Then suspicion. Then something uglier. At the red cloth. At the Apache boy beside Clay. Mercer, he called. His hand rested too near his rifle. What in God's name is this? Wind moves through the draw. Cold as creek water. He studied the 2 riders. Studied the fear already working inside them. Then he looked once at Taza. The boy stood straight. No fear in him now. Only clarity. Clay tightened his grip on the broken arrow and understood the fight had changed shape. By sundown, the story had outrun them. Clay Mercer knew it before he reached the ranch. He could feel it in the road. In the way two wagons passed without waving. In the way a rider on the far rise turned his horse to watch him and Taza too long. The valley had ears. And Walter Briggs had given it a tongue. Clay rode through his gate at dusk. Taza close behind. The yard looked the same. Barn. Well. Fence line holding against the wind. But sameness meant nothing now. Not when fear had already arrived ahead of them. Clay unsaddled in silence. Taza carried in the field glass and the broken arrow shaft wrapped in a scrap of cloth. Proof. Thin proof. Fragile proof. The kind that could still be laughed off by rich men in clean coats. Inside the cabin, firelight pushed back the dark. Clay set the cloth bundle on the table. Opened it. Arrow. Red strip. Both lying there between a tin plate and Ellen's old clock. Taza stood over them. Will the sheriff listen? Clay took off his gloves. Slow. Maybe. The boy's eyes stayed on the table. But Briggs will speak first. Clay looked at him. The kid was learning fast. Too fast for his age. That was what frontier life did to children. It stole the slow parts. Clay reached for the coffee pot hanging by the stove. Still warm from the morning coals. He poured what was left into 2 cups. One for himself. One for Taza. The boy wrapped both hands around the tin and let the heat sit in his fingers. Outside, the wind rose. Pushed dust against the cabin wall. The horses stamped once in the lean-to. Clay stood near the window. Looking out at the darkening pasture. He saw it first as a glow. Low. Orange. Wrong. Not lantern light. Too wide. Too hungry. He moved before thought finished forming. Cup hitting the table. Door opening hard. Cold hit his face. Smoke hit it next. The south pasture was burning. Fire raced through the dry winter grass in a crooked red line. Wind drove it fast. Too fast. Toward the outer fence. Toward the hayshed. Taza. The boy was already beside him. Clay pointed. Well. Buckets. Now. They ran. The yard that had felt quiet 1 second before turned savage the next. Flames snapped in the dark. Cattle bawled from the far side of the pasture. A horse screamed once from the lean-to and kicked the boards. Clay grabbed the nearest water bucket and hit the well rope running. Taza hauled with him. Pulley screeching. Bucket slamming full. Up. Out. Run. Throw. Again. Again. Steam burst white where water hit the fire. But the wind took more than they could drown. Clay saw the shape of it then. The burn line. Too straight in places. Too placed. This had not started by accident. Not lightning. Not a cook fire carried wrong. A man had done this. Maybe 2. He dropped the empty bucket and ran for the fence hook. Yanked the pasture gate wide. The cattle needed room to push away from the flames. Taza, drive them north. The boy grabbed a pole and ran shouting in Apache. Sharp words. Urgent. Useful. The cattle responded faster to his motion than to Clay's curses. They broke from the smoke. Pushed toward the creek side. Clay ran to the hayshed. The fire had not reached it yet. One spark would change that. He pulled the canvas tarp loose and soaked it with 2 buckets from the trough. Heavy. Slapping wet against the side wall. The smoke thickened. Ash stung his eyes. For 1 second the whole world became orange light and black memory. Another night. Another fire. Another house he had not reached in time. Clay froze. Not long. Just 1 deadly heartbeat. Taza saw it. Saw the way Clay's face emptied. The boy ran to him through the smoke and hit him hard in the arm with both hands. Clay. Not loud. But sharp enough. Present enough. Clay turned. Blinking. The ranch came back. This fire. This night. This fight still unwon. He grabbed the bucket again. They worked until their breath tore. Until the fire finally met the creek bank mud and slowed. Until the last run of flames chewed itself down to black strips and smoking fence posts. Silence came ugly after that. Crackling. Cattle snorting. The well rope swaying. Clay stood in the ruined pasture with soot across his face and both hands hanging open at his sides. Half the south grass was gone. 3 fence posts burned through. 1 calf down from smoke and trampling. Maybe more injured in the dark. Taza stepped beside him, coughing once into his sleeve. The boy pointed toward the far edge of the pasture, near the cut in the fence where the fire had started. Clay walked there, boots sinking into wet ash. He found the sign quick. Fresh hoof prints. 2 horses. Shod. 1 rider had dismounted. A kerosene rag lay half buried in the dirt, blackened at one end. Clay picked it up. Smelled oil. Behind him, Taza crouched near the broken fence wire. He lifted something from the ground. A brass cartridge casing. New. Town-made. He held it up in the moonlight. Clay knew the brand. Briggs bought that ammunition in bulk for his men every fall. The boy looked toward the valley. They wanted the Apache blamed. Clay nodded. If the fire had caught the whole pasture, if the hay shed had gone, if neighbors had seen smoke from town, Briggs would have his story by morning. Apache attack. Savage revenge. A rancher punished for helping the wrong people. Simple lies for simple men. Then came the next sound. Hooves. Many. Not 2. Not 3. A line of riders approached from the road with lanterns swinging. Neighbors. Town men. Drawn by the fire just as Briggs would have hoped. Clay straightened. Taza stayed beside him. The riders came through the gate and reined in at the edge of the blackened pasture. Faces lit from below, uneasy. Curious. Armed. Eli Tanner's boy was there again. So was Sheriff Pike. And on the far end of the line, sitting easy in a dark coat with no suit on him at all, was Darren Cole. He looked over the burned ground. The broken fence. The Apache boy standing beside Clay Mercer. Then he smiled the smallest smile. Not big enough for most men to notice. Big enough for Clay. Big enough to tell him the first blow had landed. And worse was coming. Lantern light shook across the blackened pasture. Men sat their horses in a crooked line. Some stared at the burned grass. Some stared at Taza. Most did both. Sheriff Pike dismounted first. Boots sinking into wet ash. He looked tired already. Like a man who had ridden into too many arguments and found another waiting. Clay Mercer stood still beside the ruined fence. Soot on his coat. Smoke in his hair. Taza at his shoulder. Darren Cole stayed in the saddle. Clean gloves. Clean boots. That was the first thing Clay noticed. Too clean for a man who had just ridden hard toward a pasture fire. Pike crouched near the burn line. Touched the dirt. Rubbed black ash between his fingers. Then he looked at the kerosene rag in Clay's hand. "Where'd you find it?" Clay held it out. "By the break in the fence." Pike took it. Smelled it. His eyes hardened. One of the town men muttered behind him. "Kerosene." Another answered. "Apache used that?" Nobody replied. But the silence that followed had teeth. Darren Cole broke it. "Maybe they learned." Clay turned his head slowly. Cole gave a small shrug. "Warriors have been near this ranch for days." Taza stiffened. Clay felt it without looking. Sheriff Pike straightened. "There were riders here before us?" Clay nodded toward the tracks. 2 horses. Cole smiled faintly in the dark. Could have been anybody. Clay stepped aside and pointed lower. At the fresh hoof prints. At the place a man had dismounted. At the cartridge casing Taza now held in his palm. Pike took that too. Turned it under the lantern. Brass shining dull gold. Cole's smile faded a little. Town made, Pike said. Clay's voice stayed flat. Briggs buys those by the crate. A stir moved through the riders. Not loud. But enough. Enough for fear to begin changing direction. Cole leaned forward in the saddle. Careful, Mercer. Clay looked up at him. No. Just one word. But it landed hard. Pike glanced between them. The wind shifted. Smoke blew across the yard. One of the cattle coughed near the creek. Then Taza spoke. Clear. Steady. Not loud. My people do not waste food. Every eye turned to him. The boy stood in the moonlight with soot on his cheek and the glow of the lanterns catching in his eyes. He pointed toward the half-burned pasture. If Apache wanted to hurt this ranch, they would kill cattle. Then toward the kerosene rag. Not burn grass. No one answered. Because the boy was right. And right answers can anger frightened men more than lies. Cole gave a short laugh. You expecting us to take lessons from a child? Taza didn't look at him. He looked at Pike. At the draw this morning, Briggs' cattle were left dead in Apache ground. Pike's face changed. Only slightly. But Clay saw it. Recognition. He had heard something already. Maybe rumor. Maybe half a report. Taza went on. Red cloth was planted there. Cole snapped, that's enough. The sharpness in his voice told more truth than any confession could. Clay heard the shift in the men behind Pike. Heard reins creak. Heard doubt arriving. Cole heard it too. That was why his hand drifted lower. Too near his revolver. Clay saw it. So did Pike. The sheriff's voice turned to iron. Darren. Cole stopped. Pike stepped closer to Clay. Kept his own body between the rancher and the riders. A quiet move. But not a small one. Take the boy inside, he said. Clay did not move. Pike met his eyes. Now. Clay looked once at Taza. The boy looked back. Not afraid. Just angry. Old anger in a young face. That settled something in Clay. He had spent 3 years surviving. Feeding cattle. Fixing fences. Burying days one by one. He had told himself that was enough. That a man could live quiet and call it peace. But peace was gone now. And the boy beside him was standing in the path of what came next. Clay put a hand on Taza's shoulder. Firm. Protective. The gesture surprised even him. Inside, he said. Taza opened his mouth. Clay tightened his grip slightly. The boy nodded and moved toward the house. Not fast. Not like prey. Like someone obeying because he chose to. Clay watched him reach the porch. Then he turned back. To Pike. To Cole. To the line of men still deciding what kind of night this would become. Cole recovered his smile. Thin thing. Ugly thing. You going to hide behind an Apache boy now, Mercer? Clay started walking toward him. Slow. No rifle in his hands. No hurry in his step. Just purpose. The riders shifted. Horses sidestepped. Pike said his name once. Didn't matter. Clay stopped beneath Cole's horse. Looked up. Smoke moved between them. You burned my pasture. Cole's grin flickered. Prove it. Clay's voice stayed low. That's what I'm about to do. Pike stepped in before Cole could answer. What do you have, Clay? Clay pointed toward the house. Field glass. Then toward the valley. Riders driving Briggs stock through Apache ground this morning. Then down at the burn line. Kerosene. Briggs cartridges. Fresh shod horses. Cole spat into the ash. A pile of guesses. Clay's eyes never left him. No. He pointed now to Cole's boots. Clean leather. No ash. No mud from the road. No sign of a man who had ridden hard to a fire from town. Only the shine of someone who had been nearby already. Pike saw it. So did two of the other riders. Cole shifted in the saddle. First crack. Small. But there. Clay heard another sound then. Faint. From the ridge beyond the cottonwoods. Not thunder. Hooves. Many of them. He turned. So did Pike. Along the dark rise above the ranch, shadow shapes were gathering. Apache riders. Silent. Watching the lanterns below. Watching the men around Clay's house. The valley had reached its edge. One wrong move and the whole thing would tear open. Pike swore under his breath. One of the town men grabbed for his rifle. Clay's voice hit the night before steel-cleared leather. Don't. Every head turned back to him. Not because he shouted. Because he didn't. Because the quiet in him had changed. No longer empty. No longer numb. He stepped forward until he stood between the house, the town riders, and the ridge. Between all of it. I'm done burying what other men burn, he said. The wind carried the words into the dark. Toward the porch. Toward the ridge. Toward every frightened man holding reins too tight. Clay Mercer planted his boots in the black ash of his own land. And for the first time since the graveyard behind the cottonwoods, he chose not just to endure what was coming. He chose to stand in front of it. Nobody moved. Not at first. The town riders sat stiff in their saddles. The Apache warriors held the ridge in silence. Wind crossed the burned pasture and lifted black ash into the lantern light. Clay Mercer stood between them. Boots planted. Hands empty. Voice spent but steady. Sheriff Pike stepped forward slowly. One hand lifted. Palm open to both sides. Not a lawman now. Just a tired man trying to keep blood out of the dirt. No one draws, he said. His words carried farther than shouting would have. Maybe because everybody knew what waited if they failed to listen. Darren Cole laughed once. Too sharp. Too forced. He looked toward the ridge. Then toward the men from town. You all going to let savages and a burned-out rancher tell you how to think? No one answered him. That was new. Clay heard it. So did Cole. The quiet had shifted. It no longer belonged to fear. It belonged to doubt. Sheriff Pike turned toward the riders from town. You saw the tracks. He held up the brass cartridge. You saw this. Then he looked at Cole's clean boots. At the sootless hem of his coat. At the very least, somebody got to this pasture before we did. Cole sneered. Could have been Mercer himself. Clay said nothing. He simply looked at the sheriff. Then toward the porch. Taza understood at once. The boy disappeared inside the house and returned with the field glass wrapped in a folded towel. He carried it carefully. Not like a child fetching a thing. Like a witness carrying evidence. Pike took it. Taza spoke into the tense dark. From the north draw. This morning. He pointed into the valley. Briggs riders were driving cattle through Apache hunting ground. Cole snapped back, lies. Taza did not flinch. My people do not mark trees with fresh cloth and leave meat to rot. That hit the town men harder than anger would have. Two of them shifted in their saddles. Eli Tanner's boy looked down at the ash near his horse. Then at Cole. Then away again. He had seen the carcass in the draw. Seen enough to know the boy's words fit what his own eyes had not wanted to accept. Sheriff Pike handed the field glass to him. Look. The young man hesitated. Then raised it toward the valley where the moon still gave just enough light across the open ground. Far off. Small. But there. A wagon and scattered stock moving where no honest drive should be at this hour. He lowered the glass slowly. "That's Briggs' cattle." Cole's head jerked toward him. "You blind, Danner?" The young man swallowed. But his voice held. "No." That word opened something. Another rider spoke up. "I saw a dead Briggs steer near Cotton Cut yesterday." Another. "Briggs has been pushing stock north all week." Pike's face hardened. He had pieces now. Not enough for court in some eastern city. Enough for frontier truth. Cole felt the ground shifting under him. He reached for bluster. For contempt. For the easy power of a rich man's name. "Walter Briggs owns half this county," he said. "No one here wants trouble with him." Then a voice came down from the ridge. Old. Strong. The Apache chief. He rode slowly forward out of the darkness with 6 warriors behind him. No rush. No weapons raised. Just presence. A kind of judgment all its own. His horse stopped above the burned line of pasture. He looked at the town men. Then at Pike. "Your rich rancher sends cattle to starve our land." He looked down at Cole. "Then leaves his own dead animals for your fear to find." No one laughed now. No one muttered. The chief pointed toward Tasa. "My son saw the trails first." Then toward Clay. "This man fed the hungry when others fed only lies." Clay did not move. But the words landed in him. Warm and heavy. Like something broken being set back into place. Cole's mouth twisted. "You expect white men to take an Apache's word?" Pike answered before anyone else could. "Tonight I'll take the word that matches the tracks." Cole looked around for support. Found less than he expected. Much less. Even the riders who feared Briggs feared standing alone more. That was the way crowds worked. Power held until it cracked. Then everyone heard the sound. Clay saw it happen in their faces. One by one. The turn. The recognition. Darren Cole was not speaking for justice. He was speaking for a man who burned grass, baited tribes, and meant to set a county on fire so he could own what remained. Cole saw it too. His hand moved for his revolver. Fast. Too fast. But fear makes men clumsy. And Pike had been waiting for exactly that. The sheriff's gun cleared leather first. "Don't." One word. Iron flat. Cole froze. Ash drifted between them. The valley listened. Pike stepped closer. "Get down." Cole stayed in the saddle. Pike cocked the hammer. "Now." The foreman dismounted. Slowly. All swagger gone. 2 town riders moved in and took his gun before he could think better of it. Not because Pike ordered them. Because now they wanted distance from him. That was the true reckoning. Not the gun. Not the threat. The moment his own side decided he was already falling. Cole looked at Clay with naked hate. This won't stop Briggs. Clay finally stepped forward. Only once. Enough for the lantern light to catch the soot on his face and the steadiness in his eyes. "No," he said. "It starts him ending." Pike nodded to the riders. "Bring him to town." Then to Clay. "At first light, we ride to Briggs' North Range." Clay looked toward Tasa. Toward the chief on the ridge. Toward the burned pasture that had almost become a graveyard. He gave one short nod. By dawn the whole town gathered outside the feed store and the sheriff's office. Men in coats. Women with shawls tight against the cold. Boys standing on barrels to see. Briggs arrived angry and polished. Expensive gloves. Clean hat. A man who had built a kingdom on other people's silence. But silence had turned on him. Pike laid out the cartridge. The kerosene rag. The field glass. The reports from the riders. The dead steer in the draw. The cloth and arrow planted false. Then came Darren Cole. Under guard. Face gray. He held as long as he could. Until Pike named the charge. Until Tanner's boy spoke. until the crowd began to murmur. Then he broke. Not dramatic. Not noble. Just a weak man collapsing under the weight of truth. He confessed to driving the cattle, to planting the signs, to burning Clay's pasture under Briggs' orders. And when the crowd turned toward Walter Briggs, the great man's power did not vanish in thunder. It vanished in something much worse. Disgust. Men stepped back from him. Women looked away. No one touched him. No one defended him. Clay Mercer stood near the edge of the crowd with Taza beside him. Neither spoke. They did not need to. Across the street, Briggs was finally seeing what fear looked like when it no longer belonged to the innocent. It belonged to him. Spring came in pieces. First the mud. Then the soft green at the creek bank. Then the long gold light returning to the pasture in the evenings. Clay Mercer stood at the new south fence with a post driver in both hands. The burnt scars were still there if a man looked for them. Black at the roots. Dark streaks under the fresh grass. But the land was taking breath again. So was he. Taza knelt a few yards away, fitting a new hinge onto the rebuilt gate. His blanket was gone now. Replaced by one of Clay's old work shirts tied at the waist and rolled at the sleeves. Too big on him. Still, he wore it like it belonged. The boy drove the final pin into place with 2 neat strikes. Then rose and swung the gate wide. Smooth. Easy. Clay gave a short nod. Taza grinned. Not the quick guarded grin from before. A real one. The kind that stayed a second longer. From the ridge above the ranch, 3 Apache riders watched. Not warriors this time. Traders. One of them carried cured hides across his saddle. Another had 2 sacks of dried meat. The world had changed enough for that. Not all at once. Not clean. But enough. Clay set the driver down and wiped his hands on his trousers. The riders came easy through the open gate. No tension in the horses. No rifles lifted. Just men arriving where they expected no lies. The Apache chief rode in last. Gray braids moving in the wind. His eyes passed over the rebuilt fence. The greener pasture. The barn roof patched bright where the old tin had burned. Then they settled on Clay. You kept the agreement. Clay shrugged once. So did you. The chief looked toward Taza. The boy had gone still. Not afraid. Just caught between places. The chief dismounted. Boots landing in the soft spring dirt. He handed Clay a folded paper. Town seal at the bottom. Sheriff Pike's hand, by the look of it. Clay opened it slowly. A formal notice. Briggs land claims on the North Valley suspended. Water access restored to shared use under county watch. Trade rights protected if no weapons crossed with it. Not Eastern law. Not fancy. But enough to keep greedy hands farther from the throat of the land. Clay folded the paper again. Tucked it into his pocket. The chief spoke quietly. The valley will breathe easier now. Clay looked over the pasture. At the cattle with fuller sides. At the creek running clean. Maybe. The chief's eyes warmed slightly. It was the closest thing to a smile that old man ever showed. Taza stepped forward. Looked from his father to Clay. Neither man rushed him. Neither tried to claim him. That mattered. The chief reached into his saddlebag and drew out a small wrapped bundle. Buckskin tied with thin leather cord. He gave it to Taza. The boy opened it and found a carved bone whistle and a strip of beaded braidwork in Apache colors. His mother's pattern, maybe. Something older than the trouble. Something that belonged to blood and memory. Taza touched it gently. Then looked up. His voice came smaller than usual. Am I going back today? The yard grew quiet. Even the horses seemed to wait. Clay rested one hand on the new fence post. Rough wood warm under his palm. He had known this question would come. From the first morning the boy fixed the gate latch. From the first bucket carried together. From the first time the house had sounded less empty. Still, knowing a thing comes does not make it lighter. The chief answered first. "My camp is your home." Then he looked at Clay. "This ranch is also a home now." Taz's eyes moved to Clay. Clay looked toward the porch. At the stacked firewood. At the cedar bird still sitting on the mantel through the window. At Ellen's old knife hanging by the stove where Taza had cleaned it and placed it back after every use. At the second tin cup drying by the basin. Small things. But a life is built out of small things kept. Clay cleared his throat once. "You got chores here?" Taza blinked. Clay kept his eyes on the fence post. "The north trough leaks." A pause. "Barn door still sticks when it rains." Another pause. "And I'm not teaching calves to mind by myself." Taz's face broke open then. Not a grin. Not exactly. Something deeper. Relief hitting joy before either one could hide. The chief watched it happen. He gave one slow nod. As if a question he had carried for months had just been answered. By late afternoon the riders had traded hides for flour, salt, and seed. No raised voices. No bargains sharpened by fear. Just work. Just exchange. Just men learning a different road through the same land. When the chief mounted to leave, he looked once more at Clay. "My son will walk both worlds now." Clay nodded. "So will the valley." The old man rode out with the others. Not as an enemy. Not even as a guest. More like kin a man had not expected and now could not deny. Evening settled golden over the ranch. The kind of light that forgave rough boards and old scars. Clay and Taza carried feed to the troughs together. The cattle pressed close. Healthier now. Greedy in a peaceful way. A robin landed on the fence rail where black ash had once clung. Taza pointed it out. Clay pretended not to care. But he looked. After supper they sat on the porch. No hurry. No need for talk to fill the air. The creek sounded fuller. Frogs had returned to the low ground. Wind moved through the cottonwoods behind the graves. Softer than before. Less like mourning. More like blessing. Taza worked on a new carving with Ellen's knife. This one a horse. A little crooked in the legs. Alive anyway. Clay held Pike's folded paper in one hand and turned it once before setting it aside. Then he rose. Walked down from the porch. Past the yard. Past the fence. To the 3 graves beneath the cottonwoods. The light there was warm. Golden across the weathered markers. He stood in silence a long moment. Hat in his hands. Back straight. No speech. No dramatic sorrow. Just a man no longer talking only to the dead. At last he turned back toward the house. Firelight glowed through the window. Taza's small shape moved inside, setting 2 cups on the table for morning. The cedar bird stood on the mantel. The door remained open to the evening air. Clay Mercer looked at that warm square of home and felt the old emptiness loosen for good. Not vanish. Scars do not vanish. But loosen. Make room. He walked back up the path. Bootsteps steady. And when he crossed the threshold, the house did not feel like a place he survived in anymore. It felt like a place where life had chosen to stay. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again, hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past, and your heart pointed west.